around reports last time? Was that you? Probably.
I didn't have any question. Oh, it was a question about the costing, item costing per responsibility center, but it wasn't elaborated enough.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's see. If we get some time, we'll talk about those things. But today, and most probably next week also, we'll spend some time on interfaces. I thought of a simple example to kind of explain it to you, and as I'm learning it. But be open if you think that there are more possibilities in certain areas when you're looking at this session. Let me know, and then next week I'll try to add those into the slide.
Okay, good.
Let's go through the normals. Here you register if you are not a default attendee. With the new Teams webinar thing, I'll remove the link expires because it doesn't expire now. It remains always up. But if you want to save hassle of registering every week and you are in the meeting, then drop your name and email in the chat, and I'll make sure that you get invited going forward. Till the time you send me an email and say, remove me from the list, you'll keep on getting the invites. So just a thought. So let's dive into interfaces, and then right now what I've done is I have understood with a very simple example, and I'll talk around it. And then maybe going forward, we can talk about how Microsoft is using it in the base app and try to see that in code. So interfaces, and this is a definition that I found from Google about how interfaces are considered in object-oriented programming. So it's just a skeleton of what actions you want that class to do. And a simple example is when we flip the light switch in your house, the light either goes on or off, right? And you don't care how it's behind the scene, how it's happening, but you believe in it that when you click on that button or that switch, the light will turn on or off. So in the same way, consider interface as that switch, which is just giving you some method that can be done by that switch, but it doesn't explain you how it is done. So an interface defines a skeleton of methods, procedures, or function, whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't tell you how it needs to be done. So it's like that switch that you have at your home, at your house, and it doesn't tell you how it does it, but it just gives you option of what all you can do on that switch. Then I went forward and searched how Microsoft talks about interfaces. And this is what official Microsoft documentation says, which is an interface in AL is similar to interface in any other programming language, which is object-oriented programming language. It is just a contract of what all is possible with this interface, but it doesn't allow you to define any code in that interface. The implementation of those functions are independent of the interfaces, and they are written separately. The benefit that you see is you can define what it can do, but then you give flexibility to other developers or other extension developers to define how to implement in a way they want it. So you don't have to write events while you're writing that code so that somebody else can consume it without modifying your implementation. But what you are providing is an open space to people to implement those methods in their way as they want it. So you don't have to write events when you're writing that code, and people don't have to rely on your events. Developers don't have to rely on your events while they are trying to customize the process that you have written. So to make it simple, what I've done is, and it'll be available on GitHub. It's already available on GitHub. I've just set it up. I have defined a main app and a sub app, and I haven't started the sub app yet. Maybe we'll talk about it in the coming week, but it's available here on the GitHub called AL interface. Anytime you want to have a look on the code, you can always pull the code from here and have a look. So I'll be committing all my changes from today into this. So consider a scenario, and I have done a simple part which I didn't want to waste time into it. I've created a table extension where there is a field on the customer table called rating. The rating is an enum field, so that means there is an enum defined, which is this, which has as of now 3 values: 0 blank, 1 as bronze, and 1 as silver. And then that field is also available on the customer card in the general tab. Now what we want to do is we want to implement a rating interface, which then can be utilized to fill up this rating field. And because in the table I have defined it as editable false, so no user can modify it. It will be done by the process as we go through it. So let's start by creating first our interface. So the cool part is that you can start creating an interface, like create a new file, and let's call it as rating.interface.al. The best part is interface doesn't consume an object ID, so you can use the interface, and that's just what you need. It is an interface as a keyword, and then the name of the interface. So let's say I'll just use my prefix and give it a name. This defines my interface. Now let's assume right now when I'm building it, I'm thinking to set that rating on my customer card. So I'll define some procedure. Let's say set customer rating. And for this method, I'll need a record of type customer. I might want to have a feature where people can do it in bulk. Maybe at the beginning when they implement my extension and on other scenarios. So I can say set all customer rating. Or maybe if they don't like it for some reason, I also want to define a procedure to reset all customer rating, or maybe reset and also reset single customer rating. What I'm doing right now is I'm defining the skeleton of my interface or the feature that I'm building. I'm not, and I cannot write any code on the interface. It's just this part. This is just a skeleton that is defined in the interface, what this interface will do. So it's like your switch, as we were discussing earlier, where you can click a button and it'll behave something, but you don't know how it'll behave. In the same way, at this point, looking at the interface, I don't know what will happen when I click on this button, a button where this method is called, or this, or this, or this. And it doesn't matter because interface just gives you that framework or the structure that is needed. So now what I need to do is I need to define the actual code which I want to run when somebody clicks on this button or this interface. For that, we'll have to create a code unit, and let's say I'll call it rating. What is this? Rating, or okay, let's say my rating, just to keep it simple. And then I'll create a code unit using P code unit. I'll have to give an ID. It's military in the code unit, and then I'll say it is identity. Now that's a simple code unit that you'll always create. But when you want to define the implementation of this interface, you'll have to use a keyword here that this code unit implements. What it implements? It implements one of the existing interface. As soon as I have written it implements, there were some problems. It said that I don't have an implementation for 4 functions. So either I'm going to use these in my implementations or not. I'll have to make sure all of these exist in my implementation. Even if I don't want to do anything while I'm defining this these procedure, if I don't want to have any code inside those, still I'll have to define all the procedures which are exposed by the interface. Similar situation when you are trying to define the implementation of a Microsoft interface. Either you want to do anything or not, you will have to define or have a definition of every procedure which is available in that interface. So just for fun, if I do a procedure test, my code unit will have an error message that it does not have an implementation of test. So anytime there is a new method available on the interface that you are trying to implement, you'll have to define that in your implementation. Any confusions till now, or everything looks okay?
I do have a question, Saurav.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, if you get to define a procedure within the interface, once you get to implement it into a specific code unit, you need to override that function, that procedure.
You're not overriding these, you are just defining what happens when somebody calls this method in this code unit. It need to have the definition for each method that is exposed by the interface.
So you can't just
implement that.
You can't use the code unit implementing the SDH rating without using like 2 procedures. You need to have them all.
But you will have to define it blank. Like if I don't want to do anything here, that's okay. It's not mandatory, right?
Leave it blank.
But I'll have to define that because it is coming from an interface.
Okay, good.
Okay, so let's make it a little bit simple. I don't want to spend time into this because this all is kind of just code, right? So what I'll do is I'll create a function which is something like this. Paste it from Notepad here. Okay, so I'm just creating a function which takes the customer record that you want to get rating for, and based on whatever the value is, I'll have to kind of do this code. Okay, let me do set vacancy field, and then let me just do a variable here so that I can just calculate it. Customer ledger entry dot amount. Right. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm just based on what's get calculated from my customer ledger entry amount. I'm either setting it to blank if there are no customer ledger entry, then the rating for that customer will be blank. If it is less than 1,000, and it's just for the demo, you can have better procedures of defining a master table, how you want to set the ratings and all. But just to make it simple, because this is not about this code, I'm passing either the bronze or silver. Now I'll just call this function in all of these methods, set customer rating, and let's do something like this. I have the customer, I'll just call it, and based on it I'll modify it. If it is all customers, then I'll have to define a variable here, something like this, that for each customer go into that function, identify what the rating is and set it. If I have to reset the customer rating, then if it is one single customer, I can just write it to modify it. If it is all the customer, then I'll also reset it. And I'll have to define that customer here. Okay. Once this is done, this implementation is more or less defined. As I said in the beginning, you don't have to define all. It's up to you which one you want to define in your implementation. But you'll have to, as in, you don't have to define what happens when it is, but you'll have to define that procedure, at least, which is coming from that interface. Till here, everything looks good?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we have our own implementation of this rating, and I can have another implementation if I want. And we'll come to that maybe in the next meeting. Now I have the implementation for this interface, which is defined here. What happens when any of these procedure is called? I have defined what code will execute. But now how I actually invoke this code, there are different ways. If you think that this is the implementation only for you, and you don't want to have a flexibility for other developer to define their own implementation, then you can just consume it as a code in your pages. But if you want to use how Microsoft is using it in different areas, what you want to do is define a setup based on which you can actually make others able to extend this more or less, or define their own implementation. So what we'll do in that case is we'll create a new enum, which is, let's say, new file, and I'll say rating implementation.enum.af. The enum and 50001, and let's say this is called as GH rating. Yeah. Okay. This is my another enum. Now I can define, just to start with, this is the first implementation and I don't have any other plans right now. So I'll say, okay, assume that this is the standard implementation, and somebody want to add more values, they can do that. But then you have to link this enum to that interface that you have just built, which is here, the rating interface. So enums with Business Central also allows you to attach it by using the implements keyword of that interface. As soon as we link it to the interface, I get an error message which is value standard does not implement interface SDS rating. There is no default implementation. That means what happens if somebody chooses this value, because it's an interface which it is trying to implement, and there can be multiple implementations, as I said. So we'll have to define what happens if somebody chooses standard, and this may not be the case, but eventually if there are 5 different implementation, then you can define 5 different values, and against each value you can define, if somebody chooses this value, then this implementation is called. So when somebody chooses the standard, I want to use the implementation of rating, SDH rating, to be whatever the rating that I have set on my code unit, which is my rating. So if somebody chooses a standard, then the methods that will be called will be which are defined in this function or in this code unit. So if somebody chooses standard, the implementation of all these method in interfaces, the code will be executed from what is defined in this code unit. If tomorrow somebody want to extend it and wants their own option of, let's say, and we'll see it later, where value 1 is customized or value 1 is Vijay's implementation, so they can eventually do it based on extending this enum without modifying any of my implementation that I've done. So now it is related to my customer. So what I would like to do is have this option available, enum available on, let's say, my sales and receivable. What I'll do is I'll create a new file and call it sales table extension.al and call it table extension 3001 zeros, and this will extend my receivable setup. So this becomes my SDH. And here I want to add a field. 3000, and then in that what I want to call it is, let's say, is rating method. Which one you want to call it, right? And this is of type enum, call SDH rating implementation. Okay, everything else, that's it. Now on my sales and receivable setup, the user can go and define which implementation method they want to use, and based on that the appropriate code will be called, because that is defined on the enum level. I can say method. Let's add it into the page here. Let's say sales extension here, and let's do a date extension. Single setup, and let's call this one again and say and in here I'll just add that field at last in my journal tab, and I'll say the field is field, and the field is called something SDH. Okay. So now system knows that user have an option on its setup to choose which method he want to invoke, and based on that, throughout the system, wherever I use those actions, I'll be able to define what happens. So I have defined the setup. Based on the setup, the code unit which is implementing that interface is defined, and it will be called when user clicks on different actions, or if you define a subscriber for it. So just to make it simple, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an action on my customer card so that we can see this in action, how you write a code to call and code or implementation of an interface. So this is my card page extension, customer card, and I'll add, let's say, at last or maybe at first on one of the buttons, which is functions. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to call the action at this point, and let's say call it as set rating, which is supposed to set the rating of this particular customer. So let me add an image of rating. Is there something? Oh, there is something. Customer rating. Okay. And then I want to define the actions. Now at this point, I'll have to identify which implementation user have chosen. So what I'll do is I'll do a var here and do my sales or sales and receiving setup. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll get this value before anything happens. And there's no blank option in that enum, so I'm safe there. Now I need to define the interface that I'm going to consume. So this is my interface one, let's say, and call it as interface with whatever the name of the interface. Rating implementation. Now this is my interface which I want to use, and I need to set this up. So what I'll do right now, and this might be a little bit confusing at this point, what I'm doing right now is I'm saying that my interface, which is my rating implementation, is equal to whatever is available on sales and receivable setup in the field called SDH ranking method. I have linked my interface based on the option chosen by the user on that setup. That allows me to link the execution of this interface to a specific code unit, which is defining how these methods will execute. And then at this point, when I've linked it to which option implementation user want to utilize, I can directly do a rating implementation and then call whatever method I have to call, which is set this customer rating and pass the rec info. Whatever the current customer is selected, this will call. If you go to the definition, it will show you this, which is not the code where it is written. It is written in my code unit, which is my rating, which is my style of using its interface, which is this code will be called. So based on that, that particular customer will get the rating, and that editable, non-editable field will get updated to show us the value. So let me open the Business Central. Let's put a good amount of time into it, and let's see what happens. Oh, I need to publish this. Okay. So I just publish this. Let's see. Publish to server. Okay. All right. So here we are. Let's see first on the setup what happened, what we did. Okay, so if I search for my sales and receivable setup, I can see I have a rating method. The option only available as of today is standard. Let's go back and check on the customers. There's a field which is yet empty and non-editable. So now, because I have chosen the setup to be standard, whenever I'll click on that action, which is, let me swear, Okay, and the functions. Okay, set rating. This will call my code unit where I have defined in case of standard which implementation need to be called. That implementation code will automatically execute and set the rating of this customer based on whatever the logic that I have written. So this one becomes silver. Let's come here. These all are big, who have good amount of balance. Let's find someone who have no balance. Something. Okay, let's try this. Okay, where it was function set rating. It comes to be bronze. Now it looks a little bit complex while we were writing it, as in why we have to write it at 5 places and and things like that, because that was my first thought while I was trying to understand the whole concept behind introducing interfaces in business intelligence. But now let's understand it that you build an extension which is available either on app source or for your customers, or one of your one customer who's using it is not your customer, so they purchase that extension from you, and you have this rating solution in your extension. When they purchase this extension from you, they still can't see the source code because you are an ISV and you have written the source code which is there. And if that customer want to change how they want to implement or how they want to calculate set customer ranking, they'll have to go to their partner and say, write a different implementation of all the methods that are defined in the interface that we just purchased. And we will define how we want to use it. I don't want to use this formula which calculates the amount of all customer ledger entries and then defines what is the rating for my customer. I want to define it on a different way. How many shipments they have done in last, how many orders I have shipped to them in last 6 months, or what kind of items they purchase from us. There can be different styles how a customer want to set the ratings for their customers. And if the method was implemented using the interfaces in Business Central, then that gives their partner a complete flexibility of writing the implementation the way their customer wants. They don't have to find an event. Let's assume Vijay have written this. Does Vijay have an event at this point so that I can change that? Or do I have to go back to the partner and say, I need an event at this point because my customer wants something else? And when you start looking into standard Business Central, you will see Microsoft have already started using it, and you will see it on sales and purchase setup, because it's the whole pricing change that just happened, which is yet to be kind of become mandatory, is running based on these enums, and they are for sure behind the scene having an implementation defined. So if Sam tomorrow wants to, then one of their customer want to have a different price calculation for some reason, Sam just have to define the new way by writing a implementation of the pricing interface which is available, and he'll be okay with it. You just have to extend 2-3 areas like this enum and wherever these options are on customer for sure, on items for sure, and then he can extend that whole functionality if required without subscribing to any event which are available in base or not. So it gives that kind of flexibility to kind of define your own implementation using interfaces. Any questions at this point before we move ahead? Okay. Okay, sounds good. So now let's think about if you have to, if we want to define all these methods, we can define them in different areas. Like I can have a set all customer rating defined in one of the pages as I want. If I have to write this execution during a posting routine, I can write it in the same way as I wrote here. Define an interface that you want, define the setup from where that value will be picked, and then call the method directly that you want to utilize from that implementation. And system will automatically identify which you are doing, which method to implement, because you have defined it in your enum. So this one. So let's just to give you an perspective on the other implementation method, like as an other implementation if you have, just to make it a little bit easier. If I just copy this, let me reveal this and create a copy of this. This will take here, and I say this is my rating 2. And I want to give this as 50,001, and this is my rating 2, which is also implementing the same thing. In this one, I don't want anything when all the customer ratings were consumed. I'll keep this blank. This implementation only defines the set customer rating on the customer card. So I can just clean this up, but I'll have to keep it as we were talking about in the beginning, even if you don't want to define them, as in write some code into them. But here I want to change something. Let's say I want to have did it based on last 1 month or last year. Okay. I'm just adding here and saying this is based on date, and this is today, and then it is -1 year. So if somebody have purchased anything from me, a customer, for last 1 year, and if the total amount that he purchased is less than 1,000, he gets a bronze, otherwise he gets a silver, and if it is 0, then he gets black. That's another way of how I want to implement this interface, which is already defined. So now what I have to do is nothing much. I have to go into my enum and I have to add a value here. If you are writing a separate extension, you can extend this, but as I'm doing it for today on the same extension, we'll just add the new value. Let's say it's last year sale, and this one implementation is based on my rating 2, and that's it. I don't have to change any code on the page that I've written. I don't have to change my action. I don't have to change anything else. Now, based on the user, when he switches to this, the rating method will change to use this code when he chooses the last year sale in his sales and receivable setup. If I just publish this, this will add an option for me on my sales and receivable setup. This. Now I have two options. So if I switch it to last year's sales, and logically I should have some code there that if you are changing this, then existing ratings will be overwritten or turned to be blank. That's all possible. That's not a problem. That's just the code that we can write. But now if I come to this customer, let's pick one which is blank, and let's try to set the rating here. Function, and this time it got silver. Now let's understand why it got silver is based on my second implementation. This one, where I said anything that has a posting date of 1 year before today. So let's go into my ledger entries and let's filter it out based on my posting date, which is 7/3/2020 till today, and the customer number is, what is the customer number? 30,000. Should have been applied, but I'm hoping, yeah, this is applied. So this customer have some sales, and let's open this in Excel so that we can see that and calculate that field. These are all the entries that this customer ledger entry based on whatever the code that we have written. If I sum this up, this comes down to 53833.52. And based on that, he gets it as silver. But now look from the technical front what I had to change. I had to just make two changes. One, on my NM, I had to add one more option or NM value, which user can choose, which implementation they want to use. And then at the same time, I had to define my new code unit, which implements the way I want it. I didn't have to go into my rating or change something in this, because this is defined and this will still work as it is when customer chooses it from sales and receivable setup. So this is what you can, in my brief experience with interface, this is what we can achieve with interfaces in Business Central. Any questions on this before we jump into other questions, if there are any? Nothing? Okay.
Not
Go ahead.
question, but I was just checking how many interfaces are there in the base product. So
Pretty
I
good.
just noticed that there are 5 interfaces and all are around price. So
Right, because that's
as you
what we
rightly
change.
said, that price is rewritten and that's based upon interfaces. And having said that, I also noticed that in the system application there are 9-10 interfaces, but I think they have just started building. There is nothing, there is no function in that interface name is given and that's it.
Right. Yeah, it's something that's getting matured enough. And as I
Exactly.
think about kind of understanding of it, it's important because as this pricing engine changes, and most of our customer has some custom around pricing. I've seen most of the customers have some custom. We need to understand how to find where to change things. I'm not saying we'll have to write the whole implementation separately, but we need to know from where this code is being called. As in, it was hard when I was looking into the pricing last week. Like, okay, this is written here, but how it relates to what I have selected on my customer or on my item. So it's important to understand it, and if you can deliver your custom solution where there is a flexibility to do things, and you see a possibility that there might be a different way a customer want to achieve this, then you can surely use and write new interfaces in your code. Okay. So now
Saurabh,
I'll go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
from the email interface, can we try to see that what happens when someone set default account in the email account? Means how which code is executing under that button? Can we check that?
Which, yes, what I'll do now, I have a rough idea around interfaces. So what I'll do is I'll go and see, because I'm pretty sure there will be one implementation of this interface somewhere. So let me find that, and I'll send you an email as soon as I find it. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to find where they're using it. But the whole idea of having a scenario attached to a user is that also validates that user account is already set up into the system that you are trying to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are saying that my salesperson, just to take an example, all my salesperson accounts are already defined as my email accounts in the system. That's something, maybe then what we can do is create a temporary scenario attached to that user. Because I guess I showed you that last week, that there is a mandatory scenario that you have to attach while you are sending an email or trying to pop it on the screen, right? So email accounts will need to have a scenario attached to them, and based on that scenario, the email finds which person to take. Now you cannot have two individuals said to have the same scenarios, as far as I think I know about it. Let me see. So let's say text sales.com. It's for testing. I'm just doing something, and set as default and finish. Okay. Now this is the person, and let's add one more just to get clarity on this. TP 2. Okay. 365 next. So if I attach a scenario to this one, which is scenarios. So if I do a assign scenario to test to be, let's say, purchase order, purchase quote, and posted vendor remittance. I don't think I can do same. Oh, I can. Okay. That's interesting. So what happens in this case when I send, oh, so it removed it from test. So one scenario can only be attached to one email account that you have. So which means if you have defined a sales email account, then you cannot switch the user for that scenario. I guess that was your case, right? That I want to change the sender ID. But if you do that, then that scenario will get attached to that user. So if I'm even able to do it from code, the only thing that I think, which I haven't tried, is trying to attach a scenario to a user in a temp variable and then trying to pass it. But if that is not possible, then I'm pretty sure it's not possible. We can surely see the implementation of it, but let's see. Yeah, that might be a good thing to check. That is there a possibility that I can write my own email scenario? Because I'm pretty sure they haven't given an option which implementation you're using. It's just implemented within this email connector interface, but it doesn't have a setup as we just build for our test case, where we have a boolean, or sorry, a option on our sales and receivable setup. That setup is not available, at least for the email, like this. So if they had something like this, then we might be able to kind of copy the whole scenario thing that Microsoft had and just change the bit of sending of it, right? But let me see. Okay, any other questions?
Saurabh, you just talked about email connector, and in that there is no function in that interface. So does that mean
It's there. I cannot see it from here. You will have to open the system app,
okay.
which should be in my CPC artifact cache. Let me see. As if there are any other questions, please go ahead. Till then, I'm just trying to open this app. Okay. System application. Okay. So it should be here. Application. Open with code. Okay. When I come down here, there is a email scenario. So this SRC to extend this. I'm pretty much sure I know that there is an enum. This is email account implementation. But it is not an implementation, it is just named as implementation, which is weird. Okay, this is email account, this is wizard, tables, and oh, but this is not an interface, it is just a code unit which is defining the method. This is a different kind of thing then.
Can you search for implements? Maybe you'll get. I mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Barcode font provider. IDA. Let's say signature. Email connector implements. Oh, yeah. No, this is just an email connector. Extending email connector. Okay, let's go there. Okay, here's the interface that we were looking for, which is the email connector interface used to create email and sending an email. So, okay, so this is the enum email connector, and it has 29 references, which is interesting. If I do peek on the references, it is used in the email account table. Okay, email account implementation. It has been used drastically. And this is said to be extensible. Okay, so we can surely extend this. And then this is the interface, and the method in the interfaces are send, get accounts, show account info, register account, delete account, get logged as base 54, and get description. So get the what is this? Send an email using the provided account. So yes, that seems a possibility that we can use it, but eventually we'll have to kind of see where all this enum has been used so that we can change those. As in, we don't have to worry about it, because as soon as but there is no option on it. But it's extensible. This is interesting. So I can actually add a value into this enum, and then in these 29 references, I'll have to see what I have to change into, let's say, email account table, which is have a connector option. This is based on this enum. Then on this connector enum. Okay, that looks something good to search for, or try what happens when I extend this. Maybe I'll create a separate container for it and give it a try. But yeah, understanding interfaces is, these are the situation where we need to understand so that we know how to even see how Microsoft have written code, and then also have a possibility of either defining your own implementation of that interface, or or changing how it works. Okay, anything else, anyone?
Yes, Saurav.
Go ahead, Jignesh.
One of small, it is a very small, but there is a issue. One thing in a payment journal, there is a two field. If you open in Business Center client, there is a account number and EFT bank account number field.
Payment journal.
Yes.
Okay, here we are.
And when what there is a request from client that when this two account number is selected and EFT bank account number is selected, at that time the two fields are updated: bank branch number and bank account number. So when we go to the lookup, system will not validate the on after modify or on after validate event. So
Which one is this? EFT, you said what? EFT?
EFT bank account number.
Is it not part of the page?
But funda is when we go into the lookup page, it is not modify or validates the event.
Which country database you're talking about? Because this is not available in US for sure.
Yeah, it is different. But okay. Just the funda is when I'm look up something, and I need to on the basis of that value after the lookup is set up. Like when I look up the bank account number and click OK, system will not do anything. So if I'm subscribe the event that on after validate or on after modify event, so what is the best way to do it?
You should always try to subscribe to the table field event, not the page one. Until unless there is something specifically you want to do it on page, I would say try subscribing the table field extension. Table field event.
Yeah, I already subscribed the table event. That is one is on after modify event and second one is on after validate event. So when I'm
on after modify, no, on after validate or on before validate for a field, right? Those are the only two per field.
Yeah. So on after validate event, when I know the value that is a ABC. I'm in the lookup. There is a value ABC. So when I put a ABC manually, system validate the on after validate event, and on the same record, I have the whatever the customization value. And after the on after modify event call, when I'm go and into the next record, you got my point. That on the first record, when I'm look up, it is not having a customized field value. But when I'm go to the next record, system have that value that is on after modify event call.
So the first time when you are assigning that value, you are saying it's not calling your subscriber.
Yes.
And if you are trying to change it, then it is calling.
Yes. So my request is when I'm go into the one field and look up and click OK, on the same record, I need a customized field value.
I'm pretty sure this is doable. Do you want to either wait after this meeting or talk about it next week? I'm okay either ways.
Yes.
We can see that.
Both case I'm okay.
Okay, and that's okay. We can see, as in, I'm pretty sure what I'm seeing on the screen. You're saying that when you choose 1000, it doesn't do that, as in
No.
call your code. But if you change this to another value, then it calls your code.
No. I explain in detail.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
not a problem.
Yeah.
I'll wait after this. Okay. Anyone else have anything?
Which
Yeah.
subscriber would come first? Is it on the table level or on the page?
The page will come first. Page will come first. Because you're on the page. So first the page will come and then you go to the table field.
Saurabh, I think it is other way around.
Which is?
No, so let's talk about it. Forgot about events more or less. But what happens when there is a code on a page? Which one gets called first?
The table.
Yeah,
The table?
that's my understanding.
Yeah, the table, because the page would be the last one to be called. You know, the page would be triggered and go to the table. Event would be triggered, then it goes to the page, which means that the last one being triggered is on the page level. So if you get to do what is being requested here, you would just set the event on the page because it would be the last one being executed. Oh, it needs to be tested, of course.
Yeah, as in, I'm pretty sure if you both are saying it, there's surely a
I
merit
think,
around it. But
Saurabh, I was providing some training to people recently, and there I
okay.
checked, and my observation is it is table first and then page.
Which means if you get to edit it, you need to be on the page. So the page would be the last one. Create the event on the page.
That's interesting.
The scenario which Jignesh or who the previous questioner was asking, I think the code is written on modify. It's not written on validate, on before validate or on after validate. And first time when you are inserting data, it will be on insert, right? On modify will not be there. So when you move to the second record or some other record and come back to that record,
Then
in
it's a
that case
modifier.
on validate will on modify will be triggered.
Yeah.
So
Right.
perhaps
Right.
that's the scenario that he's. So he should
I
check
think,
whether
yeah.
it is only modify that he has written and not on validate, on before validate or on after validate.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, so we'll see it after this. But yeah, that's a good learning for me. That was the tables are called and then pages. But I'll surely test this, and we can surely talk about it next week. This way. Anything else, guys?
The upcoming session is going to be about interfaces still.
Yeah, I'm maybe not the whole session. My idea is to have a sub extension on the main extension that we just built today. Okay, and then try to see what flexibility it gives when I write a child extension, which is relating to this, and what happens if a customer removes the sub extension. That's a possibility, right? That I had an implementation of my interface here, but then customer chooses to remove the sub extension, the child extension. So how interface will be able to handle those situations when we remove a dependent uh, extension which is based on the main. So like it's like if I have defined uh, uh, I have defined an implementation of Microsoft extension, and then how Microsoft is managing if my extension is removed from customer environment. So we'll kind of understand that part by building this sub extension which is already there on the Git, which is there is no code right now, but we'll write through it in next week and see how that works. Okay.
Tanya is actually looking to ask a question.
Okay. I was not looking at the screen here, Tanya.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Sir, there's a question like like, can we print two number series check from a bank in Business Central?
Two number series
There are
check.
two number series. Yeah, in from the bank in Business Central. Because one series I know that you can print it, but about, I don't know. I have no clue about printing two number series for a check, because it's like two locations, and so one of them wants to print this. They're using the same bank, but with different number series they want to check. They want to have those printing. So is it? Is it? I
In
mean, is it
that case,
allowed
because
in Business Central or something? Because I have.
the check number
Yeah.
is picked before the report actually starts printing, right? It's based on one field on your bank account card, which is the last check number. You can surely have another field.
Right. Last check number.
You can also have another field for your another number series, right? But you will have to do it on a custom report. You can surely not do it in the base report. And then based on the bank plus, I don't know how you are defining the location, which one it need to pick from. But because check number is just a running number in the system, right? So I don't think it will cause any problems if you define a second number series, and based on whatever your conditions are, you fill in that check number in the request page, and that number is then utilized to be printed on the check. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So it's it's like where is that? Okay, see. So when you are here and you say print check, if it is a computer check, let's just do this as computer check. So when you try to do a print check,
Yeah. Right. This option.
yeah, so I might have a workflow active on this. Let me disable that. Switch it. Okay. Okay. If I go ahead and choose vendor account, and I'm going to hundreds bank account, where my bank is checkings. This is that as well. It's my check. Computer check. And then if I go to my print check, the last check number is set here, and this number will be used to print your check, to be printed on the check, right? And if you can just change this based on whatever your conditions are, and as I said earlier, that you can have another number series on your bank account, but then from the code you need to understand which number series you want to pick to get the last check number. Okay, that way if you can just update this number here, the rest will follow as it is, because this check number is then incrementing this by 1 is then used to be printed on that check. Does that make sense, Anya?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. So that's all for today. Jignesh, you can wait and we can see your issue. But for others, we'll see you next week. Anyone who wants to stay, that's okay.
Yeah, well, I'm going
Thank
to
you.
say, so you know.
Okay. Okay. So I'll stop the recording and then we'll continue with Jignesh issue. And anybody else who have to wait, that's okay. Want to wait, that's okay. Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you, Saurav.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. So